taking over the good term.
Oh, it's in a different spot. Look at that. Good afternoon, Tuesday, April 8th, 2025, here in House Transportation. And we're getting started a little bit later than I hope you all caught that change in time. My apologies.
We appreciated that.
Hopefully you got to go do the things you need to get done. So now we're back to work for a brand new week. And we are spending this first portion this afternoon following up on our commitment as a committee to understanding more about how the memorandum of MOUs work within the process and planning with towns and how it's viewed in the towns. And that's why we went, both Devin Neary from Rutland Regional Planning and Jason Rasmussen from Mount Escutney Regional Commission. But we're looking to hear about how the negotiation works between towns, how the memorandum of understanding goes, and just sort of the view from the towns and the piece in our committee's commitment to following up to understanding how that works. And I hand it over to whichever one of you want to go first, and then we'll open up the questions as we go, I guess. And good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining. And I apologize for the delay in your schedule. So I owe you a half an hour each.
No, we appreciate it. We need all the time we can get. Thank you so much, Chair Walker, and good to see you all again. Thanks for the opportunity. Like Chair Walker said, my name is Devin Neary. I'm the Executive Director of the Rutland Regional Planning Commission. And with me is Jason Rasmussen from Mount Escutney Regional Commission. We came and spoke to you guys not too long ago about a number of VAPTA things with an update on what we all do, and then talked a little bit about payment provisions and Category A grants and all the rest. So first, I'm going to kick it over to Jason just to lay some groundwork before we jump right into it.
So I guess first I want to ask a question. I just want to make sure we're giving you what you're looking for. So I was thinking that we're going to talk about proposed sections 15 and 16 for H488. You're asking specifically about MOUs. I guess if you could help me understand exactly what you're looking for today, so that we give you the right information.
We did have the two sections in the T-bill that were about payback provisions or requirements on projects that were canceled. And we could probably hear a little bit about that at some point, whether that area in that section that did get pulled out were to come back up. What we had happen on our T-bill when it was on the floor was an amendment proposed in regards to projects that were in the negotiation back and forth between towns and the Agency of Transportation. And in order to build a project with federal money, there has to be a maintenance agreement of how that project is going to be maintained. Otherwise, it's not a good investment of federal monies to build something if there's not an agreement of how it's going to be taken care of and to maximize the life of it. And we were given a particular example. What we committed to is not to, we can't get involved in any particular one project because prioritization is a big deal in terms of this committee does not get into the white book on each individual project. It doesn't get into the review of the project. But in terms of planning, in terms of complete streets, in terms of how the relationship between towns and the agency works, and when you're planning a project and the back and forth that goes on and what will or won't work, that's what we're trying to get to an understanding here. Then if there's an agreement on how the asset that's being built or rebuilt or refurbished is going to be managed, there is place for the town and the agency, my understanding, to go back and forth on making that agreement or to understand whose responsibilities are what. And then we had heard through the process that perhaps if that doesn't go well, what are the avenues for the town? What I'm looking for, I guess, is, are you familiar with that process? Have you ever been involved and worked in a memorandum of understanding or an agreement with the agency on a building of an asset or a building of a project? And if you at any point feel like you haven't gotten where you want to, what is the next step? And questions would be around what sort of appeal or revisitation options do you have? And that's our first priority for today. And I would be happy to hear a little bit after that what your thoughts are about some of the payback provisions, but that the particular for today is very much around how are we going to maintain the maintenance of a structure, particularly bridges and other projects after they're built, or even back up, I'm sorry, while they're being planned. And I'm looking for a little bit on that. So we have this amendment on our T-bill and we committed to reviewing this portion of the process. And if I missed anything on that, I know that a number of the committee members were involved in that discussion. And if we want to ask more questions, we can go from there. Does that sort of set where we're here and why we're here this afternoon, our commitment to our fellow representative who presented the amendment, Donahue? Yeah, does that help at all?
Yeah, that does help. So, we certainly have reviewed Representative Donahue's amendment. Specific to the MOU situation, it's pretty typical for, we help towns manage projects quite a bit. And there's usually documentation that basically says that the town is going to need to maintain the project over the life of it when it's their project. And usually that process goes really smoothly. I've never had any issues there. Whether it gets maintained is always a question. 10 years down the road, you might discover, whoops. But I think generally that's a fairly smooth process. When it comes to like a state highway bridge that maybe has a sidewalk off the side of it, I personally haven't done a whole lot of that. I don't know, Devin, have you?
Yeah, a little bit. And I'm just curious because, we like the spirit of this bill in sort of the implementation of complete streets, because that's been, at the municipal level, very inconsistent, at the state level, a little bit more consistent, but still a bit of a black box at times. We're curious about, is there a specific background relative to Representative Donahue's amendment? Because this bill to me felt more around complete streets implementation than it did the memorandum of understanding process. We definitely have had several projects on the state system that were the responsibility was turned over to the municipality, and similar to Jason's, most of the time, by the time, we get to that phase in the project, which we have gone through, iterations of preliminary engineering, alternatives analysis, the town and the state are barely in line. As of now, there are no processes that I know around appeals. We had a situation in East Pulteney several years ago around a bridge on their green that had been closed for several years while the engineering was being completed. And I know that there was a conflict with the local community wanting 2 sidewalks on a bridge, whereas, VTrans, based on the level of service and the volume for both pedestrians and motorists didn't justify it. And ultimately there was a consensus that, but through several iterations of sort of community meeting and back and forth, that there was some conflict there. However, in this case, I was just curious, was there a specific example that of that Representative Donahue was really pointing to with this amendment? Because just love a little bit more context if that does exist and you know about it.
I guess it's not so much a conflict without seeing out this particular project. I guess I'll phrase this question. Have you ever dealt with a municipality that basically had a change of heart? They went to AOT and said they wanted X, Y, and Z, and then, maybe a year later, the local people got word of what was agreed to, but they did not like it. Select board maybe felt some pressure and had a change of heart and said, oh boy, we need to go back to the drawing board and implement, what the community wants.
Mm-hmm.
I think that might encapsulate maybe a certain project. that we don't want to single out, but, have you dealt with a municipality that just had a change of mind, and what's that process like?
Not after construction, no.
No, not after construction, like this is
During planning.
during planning.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So if you want
And
to speak to that.
yeah, and that I would
Great.
say the Pulteney project is probably our best example as it relates to bridges. But I think VTrans overall, the process has been pretty strong, and I got to give them kudos around their, the municipal and regional questionnaire for these state projects. I think really helps understand early on in the process where the potential conflicts arise, and then the community meetings also. Some of that responsibility when VTrans staff come out to a community to um, present on alternatives or the local concerns. There is some responsibility of the locality to make sure that that meeting is well advertised and accessible to the other people in the community. Because in your situation you're referencing, it sounds like, and this has happened to us before, where the community doesn't really know what's going on until it's too late. And that feels like that's more of an engagement and outreach issue than it is, any level of sort of process or appeals for the agency. Jason, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think fundamental to this situation, I think, is it takes years to get projects done, right? So select boards might change, and some might change their minds. So I can remember a few projects like this. So we had one where there was a town highway bridge project, and the town was all for it. It got into the transportation program. It was great. It was chugging through the development process. And then it got to the point where the town had different leadership, and they thought it was over designed, and the local match was going to be at this really high number. And they're like, oh, geez, we could just do this ourselves for the cost of the local match. So they killed the project. So those sorts of things do happen, unfortunately. And there's a number of sidewalk type projects where the town, certain towns thought this was a great idea, and they start in that process. It gets funded, they're designing it, new select board comes on board, or the neighborhood comes out and up in arms, and they kill the project. So those are very unfortunate situations. So I think if we can try to avoid that, that would be good. But sometimes it is just politics being politics, I'm afraid.
So if we have a sidewalk project near a town or potentially out on the outskirts of town, a sidewalk doesn't built to last 100 years, I guess. The road and the sidewalk don't last 100 years. But if we're building a bridge and it's 100 years and it's somewhere near downtown or somewhere near a town center or somewhere near a village, generally the conception I would guess is that through complete streets and the heavy belief in bike ped and the sharing of the road that really has changed. Mindsets have changed in the last 20 years. And we have members of the committee who've really been instrumental in help change that view over 20 years to make it view of all modes on the streets. And you might speak to the complete streets. It seems to be obvious when that is near any type of any significant development. But when we have roads that are miles out of town or whatnot, that may only be they're in a 50-mile-an-hour zone, or if it doesn't matter to it may be in a 40-mile-an-hour zone, but they're not near a concentration. But the bridge is going to last 100 years. But the maintenance of the bridge and whatnot becomes an issue. They're 6 to 8 miles away from the town center, the town highway garage. Maintenance is a long ways away. The state highway plow is going through and winging back the snow, but they're not going to be able to come back and, maybe hit a sidewalk or not. How do we balance the potential of not being able to crystal ball that doesn't exist for the 100 years and our overall philosophy of a bike ped friendly planning?
Yeah.
And do we do a good job of that?
Yeah, Jason, I can take this one. I think we are addressing this currently in our work with VTrans on the update to the design guidelines, and that the real significant shift in this effort is to consider context sensitive design, to where we really want to see complete streets infrastructure and all multimodal infrastructure better align with the future land use areas and areas for growth and conservation. So to your point, Chair Walker, you know, what we're contemplating in this design update, and actually the annotated outline was just completed this week. So the first phase is just about to be completed. And hopefully by the end of the year into next year, it will be totally done. But the idea is that, these specific amenities and complete streets infrastructure are installed in areas that can support that maintenance, like our village centers, our downtowns. And as that area's context changes from that village area to maybe or the village center or downtown to a village area and then to a rural area, what you apply for infrastructure in that area changes based on that land use type. So I do think that's important for maintenance too. Like you said, if it's way outside the village center where it doesn't connect to sidewalks, or there's not the level of maintenance and care that they're used to, then it doesn't feel as appropriate. So I do think that's one thing VTrans is working on right now that could make a bill like this a bit unnecessary and maybe even redundant. Not that redundancy is bad, because we already have a complete streets law, right? And this would actually implement some level of redundancy onto that. So I'm excited about this effort, and I do think that it could address some of these issues.
And if I could add on to that a little bit,
Please.
I think we're all updating our regional plans now to sort of, look at land use patterns and where's infrastructure, where do we want walkable neighborhoods and all that. So that combined with, town plans and, towns have feasibility studies. I have a couple towns with a sort of a bike network concept for, over time that they'd like to achieve. So I think, we can look at those sorts of things. What's the existing land use in the neighborhood of the bridge? What are the planned future, conditions for land use in that area? And through those efforts, I think we can get a pretty good handle on whether a sidewalk is really needed in that particular location or not. And I think, regional planning commissions would be more than happy to work with the agency on helping out in that thought process.
Do you think that happens today? That back and forth, that exchange, that planning, the partnership with the towns on these projects?
I think it happens. I think it does happen. I think, the questionnaires Devin was talking about and some of this other stuff is a process that works and can invite that sort of input. Our the VPSP2, where we select and prioritize projects when that's active, it provides another opportunity to provide that kind of detail. But could it be better? Sure. I think some project managers are just better at reaching out to us in the communities than others. But I think in general it is working. But there's always room for improvement.
Thank you. Representative Wiley, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, just more a comment. Thank you very much. This is super helpful. I think in this instance, again, not to trying to find that balance of speaking about this instance as representative of maybe other things, right? It's a situation where the future, where the current land uses are maybe don't reflect the future potential that could be there. And so looking at it with sort of today's eyes, there is an argument that someone could find defensible that maybe this is the right approach. But if you were to look at it in the future, and I think that's where, we really need to sort of beef up our toolkit, I guess. so that, we are not, putting infrastructure in that has this long life that is then going to be, unable to meet needs or would have to be very expensively retrofitted in a time when we're really struggling to just get the basic stuff done. So it's just trying to, make the best decisions that we can, so we use the resources as wisely as we can. In a period of very scarce resources for all of those things.
Yeah, are very sensitive to that and understand that, the capital program isn't able to meet the needs everywhere. And I think this needs to be really in a very critical lens of where it's logistically and economically feasible. Because it's not everywhere. As much as we'd love to see that, that's just not what we need. We need bridges replaced, whether they have sidewalks on them or not. So yeah, that is true. And I definitely feel like there are some parallels here with our discussion that we had on the payback provision and VTrans funded municipal projects as well. And it speaks to the comment Jason made in that, ultimately the failure seems to be, or the conflict arises when there is this change of heart or this political changeover at the municipal level. So it does feel like there's an opportunity here for the agency and RPCs to work together to really try to engage at a deeper, more comprehensive level to avoid some of these back end conflicts. Because really, at the end of the day, I don't know if there's anything greater to be implemented than an MOU to deal, like we don't really have any other mechanism to say like, hey, you're committing to taking on the maintenance, sign this contract and you're going to do it. And barring, some like level of enforcement that just doesn't exist right now, I think that is the best option that the agency is employing. So whether there's process changes similar to the Municipal Assistance Bureau with VTrans municipal projects of, can we make it a little bit more transparent and predictable for those towns? Sure. I think that's where the opportunity lies, not necessarily in this type of statutory language, because reading it, we have some real concerns about the feasibility, because the timeline presented sort of says like any project before construction phase. Well, what if you're ready to send out bid documents? What if you're already selected that alternative, already gone through NEPA? Are you going all the way back now to implement a facility that wasn't in the design? So we do have concerns about this potentially delaying critical construction projects that are at sort of close to the finish line, in an attempt to add facilities that may not be necessary. So that's a definite sensitivity that we have.
Representative White?
Thank you. I have a couple questions. So the first regarding a town's ability to sign an MOU, do you, as a regional planning commission, work with the towns and kind of help them understand and work through any concerns that may be brought up in this MOU? They might get cold feet about some of the language in there. Is that something that is kind of a regular part of the work RPCs are doing?
I would say yes. There's always situations where a town manager just is fully capable of running with it without us. But yeah, typically we are involved with that and try to help sort of be that liaison between the town and VTrans in a case like that.
And you all were talking about, making sure that in areas that are designated for growth, make sure that we are using complete streets and kind of taking advantage of these bike ped opportunities in these designated areas. I think the Donahue situation is outside of that, in that this was kind of on a 50-mile-per-hour road. So it sounds like the conclusion might be it isn't really a priority. for that particular example. Yet I think the committee, we all kind of paused for a couple of reasons. Number one, thinking about a bridge is supposed to be around for 100 years. So it's 2025, and in 21-25, are we really going to be happy with a bridge with no sidewalk? And recognizing that this particular example was going backwards in design in terms of it currently has a sidewalk and the new bridge will not have a sidewalk. And that also felt like, really? Like, we're really going to go back to that? And this is something that we're really trying to be smart about planning for the future. So, those are some of the concerns that at least came to my mind. And, maybe it's just too optimistic to think that every structure like this, when we're looking at 100-year structure, is it too much to think that we would like all of those structures that are going to be around for that period of time to have some of these bike ped pieces as part of the plan going forward? Or, is that too optimistic, or is that realistic?
I'm thinking, I think, so number one, thinking ahead, these are great questions. I think this is really, really good. And I think some towns have thought this through, and they have, in their town plan or maybe in the regional plan, we're calling for these things where, whether it's a new town center or whether, whatever it is, we want sidewalks on these facilities in this part of town. So, in some cases, we may know that. I'm thinking of a bridge that's a current funded project in the very northern part of Chester, where I'm going to call it in the boonies, where, we think of pedestrian use. Generally, the typical person, is willing to walk about 0.6 of a mile, half mile, something like that. So if it's really out there in the boonies, I would personally want some compelling reason why a sidewalk would make some sense there. And again, I think that's where, the agency and the town and the Regional Planning Commission could talk about that, because hopefully somebody's thought about that a little bit. It would be great to have these facilities everywhere, but it's expensive. So I think we should be strategic about it. And if there's some really good future planning that calls for that kind of an investment, I think let's do it there. But maybe not in northern Chester, where I'm thinking where really nobody walks at this point in time.
Representative Powell?
Yeah, it's not, I guess it's not really a question, but it could be one to comment on. Now, in this particular case, the decision was made to not put a sidewalk in, but that didn't mean complete streets weren't considered, in that the width of the lanes, included, I think, 5-foot shoulders. And so that does still accomplish the same thing. Maybe individual sidewalks on both sides that are accessible, easily accessible is maybe the ideal. But to me, it does seem like, as far as complete streets goes, you look at it and you come up with, what is the best solution. And in this case, as a biker, the sidewalk isn't going to do me any good because I can't get up on it. So, the wider shoulder and a well-marked shoulder may be the best solution all the way around.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think that's.
I'll ask a question. There is a question here. In your experience going through the complete streets process, are you seeing sort of this, review and back and forth as you discuss what's best for intersections, bridges, and things like that?
Well, it depends whether it's on the state or local system, but I think one thing that could be helpful, municipalities right now have to prepare complete streets reports on all their projects in a municipality. We've always had kind of issues with this program because we, as RPCs, collect that information and it's really, really inconsistently applied by municipalities. However, I think it would be really great to see that reporting done by the state and made accessible to the towns or RPCs to just show evidence that, hey, this consideration was made and we opted not to for this reason. So again, getting back to that transparency in the process, if we're making it transparent and predictable, then there's justification to not implement that that amenity, then I think that is completely justifiable and within the statute as it's written. Jason, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think these things do get talked about, but I'm not always necessarily in the room, and you sort of wonder about sort of the decisions, but I'm reminding myself as we sit here, there is a Complete Streets reporting tool on the VTrans website, and so we can, in theory, go check out a project there and see what the thought process was. It kind of works. Could it be better? I think it could be better. Yeah. And I think there are, I think we could talk more about perhaps enhancing that process.
Just a follow-up. I do believe that we did improve the statutes that sort of require VTrans to describe what was the process, where did you start and where did you end up, so that, things are just decided in a room with 3 or 4 people, maybe stakeholders there. But in the end, I do believe that we did improve the statute to at least provide the reasoning of how they came up with their final decision.
I think that's true. There's always devils in the details, and I can think of a couple of areas where if it was to be repaved, you sort of wonder if you could have like a buffered bike lane or something like this. And so I think sometimes, that reporting isn't necessarily as nuanced as perhaps I'd like it to be, but I think it is there and it is working.
Thank you.
Okay, we're just about up to we are at our 2 o'clock. I guess I would, just for clarification in terms of talk about select board members changing, the public opinion changing. Is it kind of understood or not that if you reopen a project or reopen planning or reopen review anywhere on a project, that you're very likely headed for delay in terms of the timeline and, to go back and redo it and, and that adds expense and it adds a delay and, it does, but it's a choice of the local municipality or whatnot to decide to do that or not. But it is understood that anything that goes back to the drawing board, especially in this financial world, looks at dropping it off and or potentially risking federal funds that might not be available if the delay past the dates. I guess that's all pretty much what you guys deal with on a regular basis. So that's well understood.
Yeah, I think so.
It still happens though. It's well understood, but it happens.
Yeah.
Because you did have, if you want to take a minute or two and comment on the actual, if you'd like to, a little bit out of our ordinary on what we were looking for here, but if you did want to make a comment or two just to have in the back of the committee's mind regarding the cancellation piece that was in the bill that we took out for now, and we're hoping that your group and the agency will help figure out what's best to propose to us for a future time. But if you would like to take a minute or 2 minutes to kind of tell your concerns or what you wanted to make sure that's considered when that's brought back up, I would listen to that for a couple of minutes if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. And we'll try to make it super brief. I think our position still stands as we, testified earlier, and we do appreciate the committee striking that language in the short term. I think, we really saw this as 2 different opportunities. Either one, to, like we proposed, do the study, work with the agency, do this right and take your time with it. Or, we had considered offering some language to really get at the core of the issue, which for us is definition and giving that sort of that ambiguity more definition as to when towns are expected to pay back and when they're not, and what constitutes appeal and when it does not. So really whether you guys want to keep that in or not, we really want to just see that be better defined. So again, it becomes more predictable for a town when they go into this. So we definitely look forward to working with the agency on that language. If the committee is interested in pursuing that either, later this session or next session, absolutely.
So many projects and so many variables and so many aspects to it. I know that
Yeah.
we're not ready to make that definition for anybody, but it'll take a lot of feedback from your team and theirs. I don't know, Jason, if you wanted to add to that at all, or you're all set?
I'm pretty much all set, but I think, VLCT, could be helpful in that process too. And, I think where we're coming from is, just a clear set of criteria, an understandable process, so we could have everybody could have a good understanding of when payback, is more likely than others.
Fortunately, it hasn't happened a huge amount of times, but it does happen. So, and I appreciate your flexibility on the scheduling. I appreciate you joining us this afternoon and our commitment to following up on sort of how the process works. And it sounds like there's improvements in the complete streets, and we won't speak for the rest of it, but there's a long ways to go. We appreciate your time and your effort and all the work that you do on behalf of all the municipalities. So, and thank you for adjusting your schedule.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to bring up Jeremy Reed from the agency to sort of continue on the same direction. You guys are certainly welcome to stay in, and we're going to learn a bit more about I guess, memorandum and what it might not actually be. And we really want to make sure that the members out in the entire legislature understand that if we make a commitment to do something, we're going to follow through and learn more about it and see what we need to do from there. So, Jeremy, thank you for coming back in on this, or to come in on this particular project, or this sort of relationship relating to what I learned today. It may not be a term of memorandum of understanding, but if you could give us a little bit of background on what I think I learned about, you can't build a project unless you're guaranteed to know how you're going to take care of it. Huh? And anyway, I'll turn it over to you. And if you want to go from there for a little bit, I'd appreciate no more questions.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Jeremy Reed, Chief Engineer, Agency of Transportation. So, yeah, I just wanted to have a little bit of a conversation. Please ask questions. And really what we're talking about is our process to enter into various agreements when we're either on a town highway or the town requests specific features on a state highway. So a couple mechanisms that we use. One, and the most likely, what's called a finance and maintenance agreement. And it says exactly what the title says, or means exactly what the title says. And that is, it's a contract essentially between the agency and the town that lays out what percentage the town's going to pay, what obligations they have, what percentage the state's going to pay, what obligations we have. And, like I said, that is standard fare for every town highway project. And anytime there's a town specific feature on a state highway. In this case, we're talking about a sidewalk, but we could enter into a similar agreement. And that might be phrased a utility relocation agreement. But if there was a town sewer or town water line on our state bridge, we would enter into a similar agreement. Potentially, there could be other complications. There could be contaminated soils. And so there'd be a soil management plan. And again, that would lay out the town's obligations, what percentage the town pays for, versus what the state pays for and what the state's obligations are. So I believe you all have a copy of a similar agreement that we sent to the town of Berlin, and it was an executed agreement we had with the town of Guilford, very similar situation where they requested a sidewalk on state highway structure. And, this doesn't happen frequently in this identical situation. So we did have to go back a little bit to find an executed agreement. Terms are basically the same. And like I said, there are definitely situations. Reedsboro, we went through a negotiation with on some utilities. So it's not unusual, but the framework is basically the same. generally, and the RPC's did a nice job laying it out. We go to a local concerns meeting. Here, generally what they want for features. We then progress the design a little bit further. We bring forward our alternatives and the selections made. We then start a bunch of concurrent activities. Finance and maintenance agreement would be one, progressing the design, et cetera, et cetera. And generally these things get executed without a whole lot of contention, right? They're pretty basic. We do have a couple tools in the toolbox, depending on the town circumstances. We can delay repayment or spread it out potentially. Depending on the scenario, we can cap their costs. So there provides some level of certainty. Obviously with an accelerated bridge project, if it's on a town highway and they don't maintain traffic, their town share gets cut in half. So there's any number of ways that the traditional template gets modified. Again, not really used to having an appeal, so there is no process. If the town feels aggrieved by some of the requirements there. Now, if there's language tweaks with the town attorney and our attorney, we can get together and solve that. But I think at issue here is the principal objection that the town have the maintenance obligation as it relates to snow and ice control on a sidewalk. And, principally they don't want that obligation. And, that sort of creates a challenge for us. Now, I think as we heard from the RPCs and as I've testified previously, the Complete Streets does consider sort of maintenance likelihood and the context sensitivity of it. And certainly shoulders help mitigate that if you can't do a sidewalk, but you have, widened shoulders. So, again, there's ways to achieve the objective without specific features. And so we'll try to work through that. And that's largely what we did in this case in Berlin. To the sort of chair teed it up, there is some expectation from Federal Highway that we maintain assets that they give us money to construct. And so on the state system, for instance, they look at how frequently we wash bridges. Are we doing other preventative maintenance treatments like applying silane, performing Band-Aid repairs in a timely fashion so those don't become more significant and more costly. But similarly, they expect when federal funds are used on a town project or a town feature that there be some commitment to at least maintain that asset. And I think, again, the RPCs pointed out whether or not that actually happens is a different conversation, but generally there is at least some ownership of that maintenance responsibility. So that's generally the process that unfolds. And again, it happens probably dozens of times a year, and generally it's not that contentious. And obviously we're meant to be collaborative, and if there is small tweaks or ways to work with communities, we look forward to trying to make those accommodations.
Representative Murphy?
So I'm just curious, because I know this area of the Guilford.
Yeah.
When have there been any problems with the maintenance or anything?
Not that I know of.
Yeah.
As we've said, we don't really, I'll say monitor it, to say, hey, there's 2 inches of snow there, or there's some sand buildup. If there's something egregious, we might see it, but
The crews might be just doing it, yeah.
yeah, I would assume, I don't know what Guilford's doing, but I would assume the road crew's doing it in some form or fashion. We're purposely nondescript in these agreements, right? So we say snow and ice control, right? We're not saying you have to be out there every 2 inches. We're not saying there has to be X amount of salt applied. We're not saying, there's a duration before you get out there. There's some flexibility built into that. And that's purposely, right? And so, but there is just a common sense approach to whether or not a structure is being maintained through the winter.
I might just check, the new member from Guilford who replaced Representative Coffey is former chair of the select.
Okay.
So just mention this to him.
It's always interesting just to get the,
Yep.
the information from the source.
It's a small world.
So that's my tee up. I'll certainly take any questions or clarifying.
So if it was referenced in the last testimony that I appreciate you being here for, and we appreciate all the time. So if the political or the views of the neighbors or the views of somebody affected by the project, that could come up, but would it be the municipality or the planning commission? Who's the responsible party to come back and request a change on a program?
So that would be the town. We enter into these finance maintenance agreements with the town. The RPCs are certainly great assets, but we, for a specific project.
Equipment, they're not doing the work.
Right. So they are not the entity that would sort of take on either the financial or the work required in that finance and maintenance agreement generally. So yeah, the town could reach out at any point in time and say, okay, we've had a change of heart, we want to do X, and we can talk through what the consequence of X is. But again, so long as there's sort of a minimum threshold of roles and responsibilities met, we're generally open to that. Even though, as was pointed out, there is time and expense associated with that. And there does become a point of no return, but that, can be somewhat fluid based on the need of the project as well, right? So the urgency to get a bridge off or if it's a sidewalk asset, maybe we can add it to a project fairly easy. So again, not a consistent immediate point of no return. It does sort of depend on the project.
You say every highway project has these?
Town highway project would have these. Yeah.
And they only come up in these other situations if there's a feature that they're adding to it or whatnot.
Right. So
that's why it's more rare.
Yeah. So on the state system, right, we do have the ownership obligation, but if a town wants a feature and whether that be ornamental lighting, in this case, a sidewalk, sewer line, water line, then we would enter into that finance and maintenance agreement.
Might not be, I guess we don't get some ornamental lighting during a down, whatever it might be, but it's a state, project, I would guess. Maybe I'll go back to my own town instead of the Burlington-Winooski being an obvious big thing, and I don't know all the details of that. I would think how it appears and how it fits into that area is going to be very important. So if the ornamental lighting or the lighting from across and bringing arts into transportation or all the other things that go on, there's going to be an agreement of who's taking care of what in relation to that all the way back in the planning process. Because I would imagine, something that has such the traffic for Vermonters, that how it useful is important and critical, but how it helps contribute to the neighborhood, the town, the feel of that area has got to be hugely important. So who maintains what must be set much, much earlier, I guess.
Exactly right. And these agreements not only establish those roles and responsibilities, but if a town wants, let's just take ornamental lighting, a specific structure or shape and sort of aesthetic feature for sort of compatibility with the rest of the downtown, for instance, we will then take that request and that finance and maintenance agreement and use it to justify to a federal highway through I'll just run another acronym, a PIF, public interest finding. And basically what that allows us to do is say, we want this specific, light assembly. And the reason for that is, consistency throughout the town to match all the others. We do something similar with signals, right? Our town crew knows this type of signal system. We want to continue that. And so we will, again, use that finance and maintenance agreement to justify to federal highway to incorporate a very specific feature and not just have sort of an open bid process.
Anybody else have any questions about the process or about finance and finance and maintenance agreement, which we now have on our website under witness. Jeremy Reed is on the website for those of you who want to see examples of it. And it is all part of the regular process, I guess. Is there other questions or comments?
No, just a comment. It just seems like, I'm really glad we're talking about all of this. The more we can kind of start to, drill down into some of these granular issues, and develop, a more consistent and transparent approach. And it sounds like the RPCs are in a fabulous role to sort of be the kind of interpreter, translator of, where you guys are coming from and the towns. So that, we build that capacity in our towns to be able to take advantage of more of these things. And, we have hopefully fewer, kind of reflex responses from select board saying, oh, maintenance, no,
Right.
absolutely not. And then there's some buyer's remorse afterwards. So just learning that, these things can be addressed in a variety of ways on a functional level, but also why might you want to rethink this, like your future, land use and things like that. So sometimes that can, I've sat on a select board and those, in the moment, those decisions, are hard to make, especially if it's happening maybe during budget time. And, you've got a lot of competing needs. So having that broader context can be really helpful. And I've just been thinking, in my instance, we had a town manager who is pretty knowledgeable and sophisticated, who could sort of paint that broader portrait for us. But
Right.
that's not the case in some of the little places.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the underlying issue here is sort of not only that, but when, and I think you asked the question, today, if there isn't that commitment for maintenance and there isn't that identified resource, how do you bridge the gap from today and maybe 40 years from now? And I don't know the answer to that. But I get the sense that the committee has no interest in the state taking that responsibility, and certainly the towns are resource constrained. So I don't know how we bridge that gap, but I think that's one of the underlying questions that need to be answered.
I think a more informed decision-making at the outset seems like that would go far to addressing that challenge. Yes, but yeah, the goal would be to not have a whole bunch of places that wish they had done things differently. And we can't do anything about that.
Anybody else? Okay. Well, Jeremy, I very much appreciate you coming in, and hopefully you covered kind of both sides on this piece. If there's more questions or more feedback as we go forward, for those of you who've been involved in the process, I appreciate your efforts. If we have more questions, we will come back to you on that area. So we'll be in effect a little bit ahead of schedule. We've got Jeremy scheduled up for the next piece. We're going to move to the automated speed enforcement. And Representative Corcoran will help me here when I don't describe it correctly for all the new members. Moving back a few years, there's been significant all new subject: workplace safety. Workplace safety, particularly highways, particularly really geared towards the interstate, high speed. I believe we were talking mostly interstate traffic, high speed traffic, interstate safety for the workers working on construction projects. And I guess there are the sheriffs or the people that are out there, but they're not pursuing speeders or anything. It's about warning lights and about trying to protect the workers. And there was a pilot program put into the transportation bill last year that perhaps, or for using new technology to run a pilot on and using a particular vendor that had even come in and presented, I believe, at one point in the process, that would read the license plates. And then there would be a process where if you are speeding in the construction zone, you would get a warning. And then if you were then to trigger another reading on that license plate in a certain time frame, you would then get a fine in the mail after your warning if it was within a certain amount of days. And then if another one, that would be an increased fine in a third occurrence within a certain amount of days. And there were a number of advocates on the committee that had been working on it for a while. And it was added into the language of last year's transportation bill, I believe.
It was actually a standalone bill.
Standalone bill,
It
yeah.
was a standalone bill.
There you
Yep.
go. And it goes back to my often comment that if I were gonna known I was gonna sit here, I would have paid a better attention when I was sitting in representative.
Start thinking about your basketball,
Yeah.
basketball team.
And
Sounded good to me. I would go along with it.
be loud and confident, if not correct, and people will believe you. Representative Pouch will always factize my story, and I appreciate it. Although I think it was our witness that said that it was a standalone bill. It was advocated pretty heavily out of this chair. The previous occupant of the chair, not that you weren't necessarily, I couldn't speak to whether you were a big advocate. We wanted to do this test project, that's what was passed. Now I understand that getting it up and running, the expectation it would start July 1st of this year, that the agency would go through from last year to this year and be ready to start this year. There are some concerns about the way the language was written and their struggles to implement it related around law enforcement pieces of it. And they are required in those statutes to come back and give us a report and update as to where it's at or not. I don't remember that,
No.
but you're doing it anyway.
Yes.
And you need some potentially maybe asking for some adjustments to help the program work more, to make it work, period.
Right.
That's sort of what we're about.
Mhm.
All right, so if that cues it up as to what we're doing, there was significant testimony taken about privacy, about where that license information could go. We're not going to go back and redo all of that. We're going to trust the work of the committee, the former committee, that they spent a significant amount of time on privacy issues and whatnot. And it was a limited pilot project. So our goal right now, I don't think is to go redo that, but then I'll try to toss it over and say, that's at least queued up where we are.
Sure.
And then we'll go and hear from there, and then we'll go to questions.
Yeah, so that's basically it. Just provide a little bit more detail. I know there's a lot of committee members that probably don't know much about this. Basically, the pilot mandated VTrans to implement what's called ATLE, automated law enforcement. And the pilot was for 3 projects on the interstate in work zones beginning July 1 of 2025. And it was an 18-month pilot, basically continuing through the conclusion of the 2026 construction season. There were a couple other deadlines in there. One was we were supposed to start basically public outreach for this program, and I believe that was supposed to start April 1. And then as we got closer to deploy, we would that outreach would specify where they were going to be deployed. As you approach the work zone, there would be signs signifying, basically traffic cameras in use, et cetera, et cetera. And there were some other constraints placed on this. One was essentially we were only targeting people, I think, going 12 miles, 10, thank you, 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. So in theory, you could buzz through the work zone at 8 miles, 9 miles an hour over, and no harm, no foul type thing. The first time you had your picture taken, and it was a picture of the front license plate or back license plate, depending on the vehicle, the registered owner would get a warning with a picture of their license plate saying, basically, don't do this again. There was going to be educational pamphlets in the warning. And the form of that warning is what's called a VCVC. So it's effectively the same weight and value as a speeding ticket. And I think
Same value as a speeding ticket?
no, it's same category, not monetary value, excuse me. Yes,
Same tone of voice.
correct.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Vermont civil something citation, civil vehicle citation, maybe.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Right. So it's a VCVC. It is, sort of administered through the Judicial Bureau. And I think part of why they went to the VCVC was to track those warnings, right? Because, you know, if a police officer just pulls you over, gives you a stern lecturing, that doesn't get recorded anywhere. Whereas if you get a VCVC, that is recorded. Now, there's a couple issues with it under current law. If you get that warning, you still actually have to respond to the Judicial Bureau and say, yes, I acknowledge that was me. Sign your ticket, even though it's a $0 ticket, and send it in. If you don't acknowledge it, you then get essentially a penalty from the Judicial Bureau for not acknowledging the $0 ticket. The other issue is when you get I want to say it's an $80 ticket for the second offense within the calendar year or 365 days, there are court costs associated with that. And so what is a fairly low dollar value ticket? I think, you know, we add like 40% in court fees associated with that ticket.
Representative Powell?
Are these court fees if you decide to go to court?
No. They are just a matter of
I don't remember any of that testimony.
well, we didn't know about it either.
Okay, yeah,
So
It goes on your stamp, any ticket that you get, there's a fixed fee. It was $47, might be up to 49,
Okay.
but there's a fixed fee and then it's, I think 10% of the 10 or 15% of the ticket. So you have $47 plus a certain percentage of the fine that you get. Nice, and it goes to, I think, domestic violence. Or
yeah,
something like
okay,
that.
yeah.
So those are some of the initial hurdles we have. The second issue is we have what's called the Soldiers and Sailors Act, which basically requires the person receiving the ticket to be asked if they are active duty military. Now, obviously, through an automated system, we can't do that. So the way around that is you can log in. The DoD has a website, and it's basically their personnel website, and you can ascertain whether or not that person is active duty military or not. There are some concerns about correctly identifying that, and so correctly identifying that individual. You can imagine there's a lot of Joe Smiths probably in the military, and so one of the ways to ensure sort of correct identification would be through some privileged information that only a law enforcement officer would have. So where I'm going with all this is a law enforcement officer needs to issue the ticket. They need to do the Soldiers and Sailors Act verification because that needs to happen before they do the actually sign the ticket. And what we're finding is there isn't really the law enforcement capacity to do that. And you know, we've worked with VSP, and they're like, look, it can't happen. And really, they're going to be from a state entity the arm to do that. So we sort of identified a fatal flaw in that it is a VCVC that has multiple reasons why it's a fatal flaw. And so what we're coming back to this body, not just this committee, but this body is a request to alter the VCVC in form of more of an administrative penalty that has the weight or you know, gravitas of a parking ticket or an easy pass violation, for instance, that it isn't associated with a VCVC.
Representative McCoy, you have a question?
I didn't hear, but it's Soldiers and Sailors. Is that like a federal requirement?
It's a state law, but
State law.
it's I think enacted through multiple states.
Okay.
Representative Powell?
Yeah, I think all the states have to do it. And
I knew they had Soldiers
Yeah.
and Sailors, but I didn't know if it was
Um,
federally required.
so this is the first we hear of it.
Yep.
And we had the public safety here saying, no, they didn't have time
Right.
to do these tickets when they don't have to go anywhere. They're right there. And I asked them specifically, if this isn't going to work to stop speeders in traffic zones, what's your policy then? And they had none. So there's no other policy they have. So, you know, we'll have to take some testimony on this, but we did take testimony on how much time it takes to issue the ticket. when you just sit there in front of your computer and, it's hard for me to believe that our state police don't have time to issue a ticket to somebody who's going 10 miles an hour faster than they should in a speed zone after they've been warned. And we've given them education, although I haven't seen any education get out there yet that says this program's happening. So I'm very disappointed.
Representative White?
I just have a couple clarification questions. So this is a pilot program we have 3 different pilots going on.
It could be deployed to 3 concurrent locations. Or I forget how it was exactly worded, no more than 3 perhaps. It didn't need to be static. So if we were at mile marker 80, we didn't have to stay at mile marker 80. We could be at mile marker 80 for 30 days and then move elsewhere. But there was no more than 3 locations at any time.
Okay. And the first offense, a person receives a warning, and it's only if they're going 10 miles per hour or more over the speed limit. I always thought that I didn't know that you could get a warning. I thought you just got a ticket. But the second offense, you receive an $80 ticket, but $48 of that $80 ticket, no.
No, it's on top of it. So you get the $80 ticket and then you
And
pay the
that's-
court fees on top of that.
And that's for the offender.
Yes.
So $80 plus 48 something. Okay. And soldiers and sailors are exempt, or what is the background
So,
for the soldiers and
Yeah,
sailors?
so the Soldiers and Sailors Act basically gives active duty military personnel a little bit more latitude to appeal the ticket. So if you're like at home on leave, get a ticket and then go back to your active duty station, it gives you some latitude to not appear in the defined time frame.
Okay, but it doesn't allow them to speed.
No. You
Okay.
you still have to address the ticket, but it just gives you a longer duration to do so.
Okay,
And it's all work zone related.
Correct.
It's all work zone safety in big, or it's gotta have the whole signage. We did to hear some testimony. It's all gotta have the orange and black, all warning that you're in a construction zone with workers present.
And
I don't know about
additional
that
signing.
Or not, but I know it was
Yeah.
all about the active work zone or something.
Yeah, and it was active work zones, right? So it wouldn't be, yeah, we'll be there in 3 weeks to start the project. It was an active work zone. And not only was there the traditional signing, but there was additional signing basically saying there was going to be automated speed enforcement ahead, so it was like,
2 signs ahead and
Yep.
1 sign when you're leaving.
Yep.
To
People
tell
get-
you you're leaving the zone.
they're getting plenty of warning. So not to go back and, retest, have testimony again about why these decisions were made, but like, why are we giving warnings and not just giving tickets?
so nationally, this has been implemented in a couple places fairly significantly, and that's the standard practice, believe it or not. So even if you only give tickets to folks going 10 miles an hour, the threat of it is enough to slow most people down. And I think, just a few people that do get a ticket has demonstrated success in slowing everybody down.
I'm pretty familiar with speeds, what is it? Speeding tickets doubled in work zones.
Yep.
So I kind of assumed that was happening.
It is if a uniformed officer is out there with a radar and they pull you over and you get a ticket, you absolutely get that double. This is a totally separate approach. One thing I forgot to mention, which is important for context, it's the registered owner who gets the ticket. It's not the driver. So all you get is the license plate number. So if your 17-year-old son take your car, you get the ticket.
Yeah. Thank you.
Representative Pam?
I was just gonna sort of add on to the warning. The testimony we had, at least from Connecticut, who did this basically identical program. Well, and they had really good data that showed, once they started doing it and warnings went out, the number of second things went really far down, and speed at those zones went down, and speed at even zones without them went down. So the data showed it seemed to have a good effect for work zones. And we had good testimony from the workers who are in those work zones saying we need to do something. Because there's been deaths.
Representative Keating?
So what you're saying is, Jeremy, that you can't do the program as it was put together for us. But you could if the warning and the fine and all this other process was changed to something like an easy pass.
Correct.
So that's really all we're asking you, you're only asking us to do that is to change. Is there any language or how we go about doing such a thing?
Yeah, so AOT's general counsel and public safety's general counsel is working on that as we speak. There were some other minor tweaks, but fundamentally that's what we're looking for.
And so if we get that into, if we get this passed this year, you could probably do your project or do the project?
Probably not by July 1. As I said, one of the requirements was to have a outreach campaign that was already supposed to get started. So we've got an RFP, request for proposals, because this is typically run by a third party. And so we've got that done. What we just don't have is where to send the ticket, right? And so we've sort of hit pause. Once we sort that out, we can get this deployed relatively quickly, right? We still have to, receive the proposals from vendors, execute a contract with them, and they need to stand up the program. But, this is the impediment right now.
But we got a solution to it.
Representative Pouch and then Representative Burke.
Can you again say what it is in this bill that you absolutely can't do?
We cannot issue a VCVC
Why not?
because there is not law enforcement capacity to do so.
So it's not, law enforcement already does have to issue that for every ticket they give.
Yes.
And so it's not that. It's that law enforcement, you're saying, doesn't have time to issue the tickets.
Correct.
So if we change the tickets,
To an administrative penalty, we would not need law enforcement participation.
then who would issue the ticket?
The vendor.
We looked at that last year for the bill and we decided we didn't want, and I think a lot of people don't want a vendor to issue tickets to people. And that's why we went the law enforcement way. So what you're saying is it's not really that piece. It's just, you're saying the law enforcement is saying they don't have the time to do this work.
Correct.
Thank you.
Representative Burke is up next and then Representative McCoy.
Well, that's fine. I think I'll hold my question, given what you just said.
And I would also offer, within the act, there are things that we did want to clean up, right? So if you get a VCVC as a $0 penalty, doesn't make sense that you get fined for not responding to that, right? So we want to clean that up and then in some way address the court fees, because it doesn't make sense to pay court fees, 50% of the cost of the citation. And I think we wanted to clean that up a little bit as well.
Okay, so I don't think it's, I guess, like to qualify that, but it's not that the state police don't have time, it's they don't have the manpower. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't want to speak for, I don't want to get into the nuance of the state
Right.
police position,
Yeah.
but I think their testimony in both this committee and the Senate was that they did not have the resources to receive these packets from the vendor, perform the Soldiers and Sailors Act, actually sign the ticket and mail it out. Whether it be manpower or time, I can't speak to that.
Okay, and then as far as the first offense is just a warning that we mail out and say, hey, you're 10 miles over and don't do it again. The second one, they don't get a ticket, they don't get a fine or anything on that first one.
They get a $0 VCVC.
Okay, so, but they don't have to pay anything, but do
They-
you want them to respond to that?
That's what we're trying to avoid, is the
Okay.
necessity for them to respond to what is in effect a warning,
Okay,
right? Because if you're like, oh yeah, okay, whatever, and you don't read the fine print and you throw it in the trash, then you get
A second one, if you get a second.
well, no, just for that one, the way the law currently reads, if you don't sign the $0, so you're, yeah,
Then you get.
then you get a basically a penalty from the judicial bureau saying you did not respond to this ticket.
Okay.
Jeremy, was there anything involved in this is a federal grant that we're using, federal highway safety grant?
Yeah, the intent was to use our HSIP, Highway Safety Improvement Program money for this.
We're not using state dollars. It was a dollar program.
I don't think it's 100%. I think there's probably a state match. But
Was there a requirement in there, in that federal piece that was driving, helped drive this direction that we were going in law enforcement piece, that there had to be a penalty of some sort? Or is that what we did in the bill that the presenters of the drivers of the bills wanted?
So we kept getting conflicting information from Federal Highway on that. Because that was the original position. If you don't penalize people, we're not going to pay for it. They then sort of walked that back, but as the bill progressed, it became clear there would be a penalty, so we didn't really fully vet that. So I can't definitively say one way or the other. If we came back and said there was be no fine, no penalty, no nothing, it was just purely an educational campaign. As I sit here today, I don't know if Federal Highway would participate or not.
So I guess putting on my sixth grade social studies, the legislature passed a law requiring something to happen within 12 months. And at the 9+ month mark, we are finding out that it's not going to happen because the requirement of somewhere in the executive sort of portion is not able, doesn't have the, made a decision that they're not going to put current resources or reallocate current resources to handle this position, this activity. So we, in the legislature, passed a law through both chambers and out, and it was signed by the governor, that said we were going to do this. And now here we are. As we appreciate it, but you're coming to tell us the status of the program and that we need to make adjustments that it's just plain not going to happen the way it is today. Because that's pretty my sixth grade social studies view on it, at least what I'm hearing right now. So that is a little bit frustrating, and our first time go around, probably many times go around for others, maybe my first time sitting in this chair trying to face what that means exactly. And I hear frustration in that, but I also hear that there's a potential solution to that. But I guess I will be, as we move forward, wanting to know where we are in the meeting of the agencies that had to move this forward and who decided in effect that they couldn't do it, or were we hear that they couldn't do it. I don't know where we go with that. I'm certainly open to more questions, but that's how my initial reaction, or not maybe after all this discussion, that's sort of where I'm at a little bit right now, but I'll have to think about it and hear more about it. I sometimes feel like, okay, we passed a law, but it's not going to happen. And that's maybe that's a little sixth grade-ish, but that's how it feels right at this minute.
Yeah, well, I think now it's part of sort of setting, so we can go this way as a committee discussion.
We'll have to go to that part, right?
Yeah, after.
We have to put our committee
Yeah,
questions this way.
Yeah.
I appreciate you keeping me that way. Definitely, our questions have to go here. We're not at committee discussion time, but we are here for taking questions or comments towards the witness. Please, Representative Casey.
You know, when I go back and forth to my camp, I go across the Champlain Bridge and you don't go too far. And I've repeated this before. They got two cameras that stick out on arms off a telephone pole, probably about a mile and a half up the road from you know, that where all the old military sites are right there. And if you look, you'll see these two arms sticking out. And at Pratt's store there, the owner Darwin told me that a friend of his got a ticket from driving too fast across those cameras. I didn't know the cameras existed. I went looking for them after he told me about it. So I'll be honest with you, I mentioned this before. I might have mentioned it to you. I'm not sure. Maybe it was the secretary or whatever, but I can't remember. But anyways, I thought it seems like a great, a great idea, great tool, considering that we don't have, tons of state police out there. I was kind of like, I like the idea of them being in construction sites. My daughters, I didn't like my daughter being in construction sites and stuff, but they, I was hoping we'd use them for more than just that. And the state police, it seems like they could hire somebody that was few people that could sit around at a desk and kind of take care of it. And if the monies weren't there, I don't know if we could increase the fines or whatever to make the monies there. I don't know. It sounds like a great idea, considering we're short on state policemen.
Yeah, I can appreciate the question. I mean, and I guess I'll just clump the two comments together. I think this is to some extent the nature of pilots, right? In that we are trying something new. I will say that the state police did testify very consistently last year that they did not have the resources to do this. We progressed the project kind of assuming we'll figure out this last piece at the end, and haven't been able to. And that's what brings us here today, is trying to sort through this VC piece.
Representative McCoy, any questions?
So this is the bill that we used cameras in the work zone, but people were upset because maybe the face of the person driving. So it was just the license plate that we're taking. But I thought we were using a third party in a truck.
Yes.
Okay. So what's the concern about using the third party for billing? Is that? Okay.
Right. I don't know if you have a comment to that first.
Yeah.
I don't.
Okay, so, all right, so we use the third party to capture the information, but we bill.
Yeah.
We aren't doing it yet, but we're right.
Okay. Okay. So are we going to continue to use the third party going forward?
I would say that this is the part where Representative Corcoran's reminding me that if we want to put it on the agenda for committee discussion, we can do that. But while we have a witness and while we're doing where we piece, we're definitely in the mode of getting our information, what other questions that we have. And if we want to bring this up in discussion, we'll put it on the agenda to make it discussion time. And I just want to make clear that when we have witnesses, as we all know, it is this way, that's
So I
break out into discussion yet. When we have discussion, we'll have it, but yeah.
If the pilot was to use the third party in the van.
Yes.
And capture all the information and send out the notice that, hey, you did this, and then the person goes through a second time, so now we know it's a second time. This is all done third party.
So
not the state police involved. So
currently, as the law was conceived and implemented, the third party sets up.
Yeah.
They've got the camera. They take a picture of the license plate.
Yeah.
I think they get the registered owner's information. They add all the calibration and all that. They would then send it to a law enforcement entity who would review the calibration information, probably do a double check on the registration, do the Soldiers and Sailors Act inquiry, sign the ticket, and then mail it.
Okay, so then, okay.
So in any scenario, there would be a third party involvement. The real sort of decision point is it a VC issued by a law enforcement entity, or is it an administrative penalty that is issued by a third party civilian?
Are you up next, Representative Parish?
No.
Representative White?
I'm just wondering, with this new computer system that the Department of Motor Vehicles is implementing, it sounds like it's going to have a lot of bells and whistles and be able to do a lot of things that weren't able to be done before. Is there an opportunity for DMV to be involved in issuing a ticket while they have people sitting at desks doing registration?
So it has to be a sworn law enforcement officer, and certainly DMV has some of those, but I don't I don't know that they have the capacity to do this statewide.
The proposed lane, oh, I'm sorry, Representative.
I just, quick question, how long does that process take? From when somebody gets the car, gets their picture taken?
Yeah.
And for law enforcement to take care of their end of it and the third party, is that lengthy?
We don't know. We've never done it. I think to some extent it would probably be fairly quick and consistent on the third party end. The law enforcement end, I think, is sort of resource constrained, and if there's any conflicting information, right? Because that's the human piece to sort of deconflict. If the picture's obscured, if it's showing up as a Mass plate, but it's really a New Hampshire plate, those sort of things. I think is where the law enforcement comes in.
We did hear some testimony on that. I do recall that part of it. Representative Powell, did you want to?
No, it's more just, we heard a lot of testimony. The packet that ends up going to the state police has already been vetted. So you're not going to get an obscure license plate you can't read. And we took some testimony from other states, how long the process is, and the fact that, the third party that was chosen, and they do this, they send that packet to a secured computer so nobody else can get it. And, that it's, we were told about a 15-minute process to do it. Certainly much less than a state trooper chasing somebody down in a work zone. And I'll just point out that when you do see a sheriff in a work zone, they cannot chase anybody down. So even though you'd think, hey, if somebody went flying through, they'd go and chase them, they cannot legally do that. So there's no one to chase anybody down or take a picture or do anything at a speed zone. Right.
And I would just provide a little bit of clarity to your question. I believe within the law, there is a maximum, right? So we can't issue a ticket 2 years after the fact.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I don't know what it is, but there was a maximum. What the reality would be, we don't know. So I just want to clarify that.
You have or would draw up suggested language of what you would suggest for changes. You're thinking that potentially the miscellaneous DMV bill might be a place for that.
Right.
Okay, but you don't have that language now, but you do have that.
We're working on it.
Direction, okay. Representative Corbett?
Just a clarification, maybe you can jog my memory, Jeremy, is, these cameras were going up on limited access roads, right?
Interstates only.
Or just interstates?
I believe it was
Okay,
interstates
it's just
only.
Interstates. I thought it was even narrower than that.
No, I think it's only interstates.
Okay. And it was for particular, there was only a certain amount of cameras or
3 at a time.
3 at a time? All right. Yeah, I wasn't sure about, I thought it was limited access. So I guess that's the interstate, yeah. Okay.
That would not include the Route 4s and the Route 7s.
Well, right. So all interstates are limited access, but not all limited access.
89 and 91 and
93.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions for the witness related to what the status is? I did have another. If you were to get the language and it were to be effective on July 1st, you said it, I know you can't nail down an exact time. What did you mean by, how long were we talking about for a delay? Are we looking at December of 25 and we're looking at a whole nother year till the 1st of July, 2026, whatnot? What are we?
So what I would propose is that if we got the language changed this session, we could essentially be ready, have an RFP. So April 1st, when the construction season starts, we could deploy the cameras. So it wouldn't be a full calendar year delay. It would just take off the second half of the 2025 season. And if we wanted to do another year of the pilot, that'd be easy. But I think if we could clean up the language this session, I think April 1st is easily achievable.
April 1st?
Of 26.
Construction season.
The beginning of
the last one construction season.
Because it was July 1.
Construction season. Okay. Representative Casey.
Would issuing a fine still be effective? Even though you limited You change, you eliminate one part of the process, does it change the price of the ticket?
No, I think the administrative penalty could be whatever you wanted it to be.
So it would simplify
it would simplify the process. It would remove the judicial bureau from the process. And it would allow a non-sworn officer to issue the ticket.
and the most important thing is the safety of the construction workers, for sure.
Yep.
You know,
Okay. Anybody else?
I'm all
All right, sorry.
Keep it all set.
Jeremy, thank you for coming in on both topics today, and we will talk to you again soon. I would say we are going to